What is up, everybody? Welcome to my recap, review, and breakdown of The Last of Us Episode 1. It dropped on HBO Max last night, and here we are. I don't even know where to begin. That was very, very impressive. For those of you who really don't know what this is, go check it out. You may have not played the PlayStation game. I was a very, very big fan of it. I'm very familiar with the game. I'm sure many of you are as well, and I think that's what makes this series so impressive already in its first episode. They adapted it very damn well. As I always say on this channel as well, with adaptations, you need to innovate also while adapting, but not deviate. You don't want to deviate away from what makes the game great. There's understandable innovation there. So for example, the fungus that is the infection in this, one big apprehension from fans before going into this is that we heard there's going to be no gas masks because essentially spores were sent out. So if we saw Joel and Ellie go throughout the world like we did at the end of this episode, and we'll see in the second episode, so on and so forth, they would have to put those on. But now it's going through a little bit. It's still very similar, but you have these kind of fungi, little tendrils, if you will, that cause the infection. And obviously you can get infected through actually being gnawed upon. So there is interesting innovations here, but for the large part of this, it is absolutely freaking crazy, the parallels between this and the game. So let's get into this. Now, this shows us a flashback right to 1968, and I thought this was a cool addition because it kind of sets the stage. We have these two scientists talking about a new virus, the whole prospect of a new pandemic, debating if a virus causes a threat to mankind. But the other scientist, actually played by John Hannah, which was very interesting to see. It's good to see him pop up again. And the other actor, I forget the name from the top of my head, but he's been in Peacemaker. He's been on the Netflix show as well. Van Helsing, was it? But John Hannah's character talks about, okay, there's viruses, but what about fungus? The character goes on to explain how the fungus works in ants, for example, and takes control over the host body, bending the ant's mind to the fungus's will, and it keeps its puppet alive. So you can imagine billions of humans in a similar fashion, and lo and behold, that is exactly what happens. So we cut to 2003, September 26. Now, the original game was set in 2013. Obviously, this is a part of the adaptation here. When we cut to present day with Joel in the future, the 20-year time jump is 2023. Literally the year we're in right now, but in the original game, the flashback with Joel and his daughter Sarah was in 2013. 20 years later, the infection where we see Joel without his daughter, when we see him with Tess and Ellie, it is 2033. So what I really liked about this opening is, while there, as I said and commended this show already for in its first episode, there's very, very many parallels between that and the first game, because we start off with that flashback on Joel's birthday, but we get a little bit more. This is the show format. When you go from video game to TV, they wanted to play around with it a little bit more, so we saw a lot more interaction with Sarah, seeing the chemistry between Pedro Pascal's Joel and Sarah as it's his birthday. They're having a birthday breakfast. We have Tommy come in, but already just with these slight expansions, you get to see the very early signs, well, not even very early because it is coming this very day, of the outbreak happening. So when she's in school, one of the signs of this cordyceps infection that causes this massive outbreak is twitching. So you see one of the students' hands just twitching like that. You see cars go by in this beginning part with even SWAT there on top of the fire truck. So it's just like, okay, what's going on here? There's choppers, there's jets happening every now and again. Obviously not nearly as intense when everything starts going to shite. But this is when Sarah goes to the shopkeeper, gets the watch repaired, but instantly, as what's being reported on the news, this spooks out the shopkeeper's wife, so she instantly clocks onto it, shuts down the store, and then we get more atmosphere building with Sarah having to go to her neighbors, because we had that little fun interaction earlier between Sarah and Joel about having to go over there, but Joel basically dropped her in it, so she felt obligated to. But then we had the old lady, Mr. and Mrs. Adler, or Mrs. Adler's mother, in the wheelchair, and I love the way the camera in this moment focused on the forefront, obviously, but in the background, you saw her starting to twitch, you saw her mouth like open wide. Old ladies, I swear, in horror-esque things, not that this is like an outright horror or anything like that, but they can be used very craftingly just like this, and that really set the tone. Obviously, she didn't go full out infection right here because it does take some time for that to fully transpire from just kind of normal to full on infected. That's why we saw the twitches, or the, later on in the 2023 timeline, the signposts for the cordyceps infection symptoms. But nobody usually really ever lasts longer than a day, and that's the difference with Ellie, as we pick up later, because she has lasted 3 weeks. So as the day continues, we have Joel get back in from his work, and we have them put on a movie, and you kind of start to realize in retrospect, or even if you've played the game, this is the last proper interaction he'll have with his daughter, like quality time spent together. Again, in this scene, just to blurt it out there, the dialogue is so similar. You know what I mean if you've played the game, and honestly, I hope, and this probably will, just like how the Witcher series did, but this seems to be of a lot higher caliber, get so many more people to play the PlayStation game. Not that it wasn't popular at all, but I wouldn't remotely be surprised if you start seeing reports of how The Last of Us has gone to the top of the charts once again, or possibly even the PS5 remaster. Maybe a lot more people will buy that. So of course, very similar to the game, this is where Tommy reaches out to Joel. However, in this series, it seems that he's in jail because something happened at the bar and he got in some trouble, but you can put that likely down to an infected with the way Tommy worded that. Someone just went mad at the waitress. So once again, all of these little seeds, if you're not paying too much attention, you might miss that there's all of these signs of people already starting to be infected and cause all kinds of craziness. Now Joel has to go and bail Tommy out. He carries Sarah to bed, but Sarah wakes up in the absolute thick of it. Once again, choppers flying over, cars screeching, dogs barking. It is absolute anarchy out there. We have Mr. and Mrs. Adler's dog appear. This again was a bit more concentrated in this show versus the Coopers in the video game. They weren't really remotely focused on, as opposed to what we see here with her going over there to bake raisin cookies. But this is when Sarah decides to go check on them, thinking, okay, well, what's going on here? Your dog's just come over to me. And we have we've had Granny Adler munching on the family. Mr. Adler still seems to be kind of alive, but not really. But this kind of goes to show how fast the infection can spread. I suppose if you've been in direct contact through being infected by another infected, because by the time Joel, Tommy, and Sarah were leaving, we had Mr. and Mrs. Adler already just out there, just like twitching and then trying to go after them, and then they just mowed through them in the car. Obviously, before that, we had students' hands twitching and whatnot, so that could happen over a little bit of a longer period of time. But here you can truly see, if you have that scene of what we saw with Granny Adler, my God. And this is in addition to the game. I know there might be a little bit of debate about this, but personally, I really don't mind it at all. In fact, I find it quite cool. When you saw like the tendrils as per what fungus can do, and as seen with ants, and how they just reach higher and higher, you saw that creepily going out of the mouth, and that just made it that much more horrifying. Now again, I watch horror stuff all the time. I don't really get unsettled, but I love getting engrossed in the imagery and the tension and what they kind of visually create. And here with Granny Adler, that was definitely spooky. I really like that, and it just makes the infected in this version that much more intriguing. And so guys, coming to the end of this little introduction, we have Joel and Tommy arrive. They get out the area, and the atmosphere of this, obviously, again, just to repeat myself, the parallels are insane in the video game. It is literally whether you're turning right down the street, again, shot by shot, the camera work in the back of the car from Sarah's perspective, it is all so well done, so well adapted, and very immersive. They even add some more crazy things like, hey, what if you're infected in the sky? And what if there's a little outbreak? Maybe not the pilot, maybe the pilot's fine, but if someone was infected on that flight, there's going to be chaos, and that's when that plane came down. So it is getting absolutely nuts, and the shrapnel of that crashing just completely knocked out the car, and we now have Joel carrying Sarah on foot. Now, Tommy gets cut off. Again, the nitpick part of my brain was just like, I know there was a fire to the left, but you probably could have gone round on the right. Loves the chase through the building of that infected. What I like about The Last of Us infected is that they're not like really slow Walking Dead style. We saw this zombie going absolutely crazy and rapid fast. And so we get to that point of that military guy stopping them. And you would have thought, your instinct is to trust someone in a position like that. And we even have the soldier questioning orders. He even radios in saying civilians injured, and he's like, I'm sorry, what? He obviously gets orders to kill them, or at least Sarah, but it doesn't really matter. He's just going to put them both down, because even though it was her ankle, if she's injured, I suppose from their perspective, they think she could be infected. They don't know if they're lying about that, but either way, you would kind of try and find out. But this is the thing. It's kind of like a prelude to Fedra, and we know, and if you haven't played the game before, I'm sure you've got the impression how hardcore Fedra are. This is why, rebel groups such as the Fireflies rose up to try and take down this military dictatorship in the future. They're kind of meant to protect you. There's a big ass welcome sign outside the QZ, the quarantine zone in Boston. Yet if you go in there like that kid did with a freaking cut on your knee, that's enough to get you euthanized. So if you leave, you get hanged, because I suppose they want to ensure the protection of humanity, so they don't want people going out. But you can blatantly tell this is an insane regime, an insane post-apocalyptic regime of the remaining forces of authority. But this is more or less exactly how it goes down. We have Joel and Sarah get shot. What's so sad about this is that Sarah took the brunt, basically shielding her father Joel. They roll down the hill. Luckily, Tommy got there in time to shoot the military guy from finishing them off. But this part just got me. Again, I might be a bit biased in one way with Pedro Pascal because I've been following him for years. But already, just episode 1, I'm trying to not jump off the bat, but we've just seen 80 plus minutes of footage. I really like him in the role, and I think that's only going to convince us more and more as we progressively get down the more humanized roots of Joel. Because after the outbreak, this is very much so delivered to you throughout the episode. Joel is completely a cold version of himself compared to the 20 years ago version. Obviously, that's fairly self-explanatory, but this is the very thing, as with references with Marlene later on, as to why Tommy left initially after the outbreak. They did very, very, very dodgy things in order to survive, I guess you could say. This is why Joel said to Marlene later, "Oh, you turned my brother against me," because as we know in the video game, and again, don't worry, this isn't major spoilers, but this is probably what the TV series is going to do in its adaptation versus what the video game didn't get into like so much. You get like hints that they did dodgy things and stuff that really got to Tommy more so than it did Joel, and that's why he went on to lead a new life, a part of Marlene's organization, the Fireflies, and why Joel and Tommy are quite estranged. Even though we see Joel trying to reach out, like the whole plot of Joel before he meets Ellie in this episode is to reach out to his brother because he hasn't had communication in a little while. That's what leads to the car battery, etc., etc. But now the means to reach his brother and find out what's going on, if he's safe, is through guiding Ellie, and the Fireflies will give them like a repurposed Fedra truck and everything like that. But before I get too ahead of myself, I do apologize with the rambling because I'm so into this live action series. Is so much better than I didn't think it'd be bad, but it's just like, damn, it is really good. So this ends that beginning flashback part, and I have to say I shed tears. It really got me. This was a really good scene, and it's hard to not be moved by it, especially if you've connected to these characters already. Unfortunately, Sarah died from her wounds, and this kickstarts the path that Joel went down in this new post-apocalyptic world with Tommy. Again, do I even really need to say it? If you compare this to the video game, more or less identical. And so 20 years later, instead of 2033 as I went over earlier, we are in our time, 2023, and we're in the Boston quarantine zone. This is, as I said, without repeating myself, a very strict thing with Fedra. Fedra have different QZs in different areas of America, and they maintain a control that is most certainly a dictatorship. Like, there's no other way about it. If you even want to go outside, it's like for your own protection. They don't want you to, so if you even break that law, as you see, people get killed for it. Now, what I also liked here, in comparison to the video game, like, don't get me wrong, we have Joel and Tess. They're kind of not dodgy dealers, but in order to survive, other than just doing work like we saw him doing, removing the bodies, one of those bodies being the kid that got euthanized right at the beginning of this 20 years later flash forward. He also does things on the side, like dealing pills, this, that, and the other, smuggling. He's been outside the walls before. He hasn't got caught. But here, in addition to that, they showed him dealing with one of the guards. Now, what I like about what they did here is later on, instead of having two guards in the game with that confrontation with Ellie, and she shanks the guard and then they get away, they make it that same guard that we already knew in the episode. So this is what I mean, like when you get the chance to do something again versus the video game, sure, some people complain about changes, but you have to be careful. The innovation versus deviation, and this is an example of innovation in the Last of Us TV show. And I'm not making it out to be like, oh my god, this guard storyline was incredible. I'm just saying this is an example of something that they've done a teeny bit differently, and it's like, hey, that's pretty damn cool what you did there. In this conversation as well, we get a teaser about Joel's motivation at the beginning, and that's the vehicle. The guard also mentions how the Fireflies have been blowing things up. Again, we have these groups rising as what we have in that dialogue later with Marlene between her other Fireflies about targets of what they're trying to do, and that's just distracting Fedra because they're trying to get Ellie out, so they want them to be distracted with all of these other locations and things that the Fireflies are doing, so there's less focus on the Boston QZ. So this is where we pick up with Tess and Robert. So this went pretty differently compared to the video game. I did find it kind of convenient. Again, critical mode here. This is also a little bit of a review. So when we had the bomb blow up in this moment at the end of the scene, I felt like it was kind of convenient that the Fireflies put a bomb exactly where Tess was, so it allowed her to escape. Whereas in the video game, the deal went down, as she says, without a hitch, and she got jumped by two teenagers. Again, dialogue very, very similar, but she handled it. So she actually escaped herself, whereas in this series, it's like, oh, a bomb blew off. Luckily, she managed to get out, and she didn't die, and she managed to get back to Joel and kind of then pick up the scene as we see in the video game. So, you know, bits of differences there, but ultimately the main thing to take out of this is that Robert stole their battery, or took the payment, but then decided to sell it to other people. And it only turned out later that the battery was in very, very bad condition, and the people that Robert was going to sell it to was none other than Marlene, because we can't forget that the Fireflies want to get Ellie out, so they needed that battery as well. Also, just in general, while I'm on the topic, the Robert thing as well, again, very different, because we actually had, similar to this, we have Tess come back. Joel is like, very like, what happened to you? Wanted to go after them, but instead of going out there all Clint Eastwood mode, as Tess said, they want to go after Robert quietly, get their battery back, get their money back. He screwed them over, so they are most certainly going to make him pay. But in the video game, you actually do that. You go and see them take down Robert, but in this adaptation, when they arrive, Robert is already dead. I suppose these changes are made to kind of increase the fluency of things going on, to keep the pacing going on, instead of just having this separate whole... It would be like a 20-minute plus thing if we saw Joel and Tess go hunt down Robert, have that whole scene, ducking, you know, taking people down, going behind cover here and there. That's a lot more footage that would have been put in on top of this 80+ minute episode. Plus, it's not like it's a massive change. So things like this, again, with the innovation that they do, or the adaptation changes, in my books is absolutely fine. And so the next thing I need to talk about is Ellie, of course played by Bella Ramsey, and we pick up with her. The Fireflies are testing her for symptoms. It's now been 3 weeks since she's been bit, but every single day recently they make her count to 10. They do all the usual symptom checks, and that's because, well, she's very special. And again, if you haven't seen the series, obviously this episode spells it out for you, especially by the end. She was bit, people get turned in a day, so she is incredibly significant to restoring, or at least having the spark of hope for things getting back to the way they are. Obviously, that wouldn't even happen for a very long time, even if things are successful, but if they can manage to deliver Ellie, as with the Fireflies mission, to cultivate a cure, because obviously she's immune to the cordyceps infection, then obviously that could be a road forward. So she is very, very important. I mean, of course, the Fireflies' main focus is about rebellion and taking down a military dictatorship to restore democracy, as she went over in that scene when they were going over the Firefly plans and people were starting to question, what are they doing? It doesn't make sense. But at the same time, if you deliver a cure, if things kind of went back to normal in the long run, then that democracy would hopefully restore in of itself, because you wouldn't require the extremism, the dictatorship of Fedra to regulate things anymore. So this is the absolute priority for Marlene, who also, by the way, played Marlene in the video game. Now, we had some scenes between Bella Ramsey's Ellie and Marlene here, and we learn how Ellie was put into Fedra military camp ever since she was a freaking baby, but that's because Marlene was friends with her mother, and she would basically be safer there than somewhere like a QZ or anywhere else for that matter. So Marlene already knows who she is, and now it just turns out that Ellie is obviously way more important than she ever initially thought, other than, you know, just being her mother's friend and trying to have some protection for her. In this conversation, Ellie also calls the Fireflies terrorists, but she was like, it was Riley a terrorist? Now, Riley, if you're not familiar with the series, is a very important character, and for the sake of those who haven't played the video game, because there's going to be tons of people who don't play video games and who watch this series, which does seem to be a very decent series, one that stands on its own 2 feet, and people are going to be engrossed in it just off of that. I don't want to give away massive things like that, but let's just say that Riley was a very important character to Ellie and was originally a part of the game's DLC, where we get into a little bit of the backstory of Ellie and how she got to be in the video game, and you see clips of Riley and Ellie in the trailer, so this is most certainly going to be explored in future episodes, and you'll find out the significance of that story and how Ellie got her original bite, and as was implied here, Riley possibly being a Firefly and whatnot, so look forward to that. But let's talk about Bella Ramsey for a second. I don't need to talk about Marlene because, you know, we had Mel play Marlene in the video game, and she's great, but Bella Ramsey, there's been a lot of discourse about Pedro Pascal playing Joel and Bella Ramsey playing Ellie. Not so much about Pedro, but Bella Ramsey, lots of people say, oh, but she doesn't look like Ellie. Now, for me, when it comes to castings, don't get me wrong. I think it'd be weird if I said if you casted Superman and he didn't look very Superman-y, then I can understand why that can be like a knee-jerk reaction. But I think most importantly, when it comes to casting a character, and in the case of Bella Ramsey, she definitely engulfs the energy of Ellie. She's like 18 in real life, but obviously can be cast down to playing like a 14-year-old Ellie in this series. She definitely looks the part there. She 100% acts the part. The attitude that she has, the dialogue, the way her demeanor is very spot on. Like, if you're a Last of Us fan, I would like to think that you can 110% observe those character aspects in Bella Ramsey's portrayal. But the thing is as well, she does fit the casting pool. It's just that she might not look 100% like the video game character does, down to the minute detail and bone structure of the face or whatever. It reminds me, and going back to what I was just saying about casting a character, a lot of people don't think Tyler Hoechlin's Superman on the CW looks like Superman, but I still see Superman in him, albeit that it might not be identical looking to like how Henry Cavill is or how Christopher Reeve was. But to say he doesn't fit in the character casting pool of actors who would apply or audition for that role, I would just say is outright incorrect. So the whole discourse surrounding this, everyone has their opinions. I can't invalidate anyone's opinions, but the thing that matters most of all is the performance. And I think Bella Ramsey 100% qualifies for the role of Ellie. And I know I might be jumping off the bat, as I said earlier, but already in an 80+ minute episode, that's a lot to observe. Some movies are as long as this episode. So I feel like we got more than enough energy from these 2 castings that I can say with confidence that I am very happy with these castings. Okay, so skipping forward to kind of stuff we've already talked about, we have Tess and Joel go after Robert. They navigate their way through to where he's located and making the deal. And this is when the 2 storylines intersect, and there's already the fallout of what happened. Marlene had a whole squadron ready of Fireflies to go out to the old state house to protect Ellie and make her way there. But as you can see, she's wounded. This is very similar to the game. A lot of people have been taken out, so her best option now is Joel and Tess. And the deciding factor for Joel, just like what he's been gearing up to do all episode, is that Marlene said that if you get her to safety, they will give you what you need. Not just a battery, but fueled up trucks, guns, so we can go out and see if Tommy's alright. And this is the last we see of Marlene, and in the game for quite a while. And when we see her again, yeah, you know, you guys will know what, you know. And I'm not trying to give anything away there, but it's just, we will see her again at a significant part of the show. Or, for all we know, the show might do some other things differently and give more perspective from her side. I really don't know, just like what it's already done with a couple of things already. And so we have Joel, Tess, and Ellie make their way throughout the quarantine zone. Again, there's a little bit of a nitpick here. We had Bella Ramsey's Ellie, when she was going past a federal guard, like very obviously go like, stuff like that breaks my immersion just a teeny bit, and maybe a lot of you recognize the same thing. Like, if you're just walking through the street and you want to be like low-key with your hood up, you just keep walking. You don't make it more obvious by going So yeah, again, that's nothing really too critical that would take this episode down for me. It's just a thing that I would have changed if I was filming the scene. They head back to Joel's apartment. Once again, very, very big video game scene parallels here when Joel just crashes on the couch. There's a little bit of a reference to Bill and Frank, two characters again, not getting into spoilers here for those who haven't seen it, who will be quite significant to their journey ahead. And so this is where we exit the QZ, and we see a little bit of the rubble of the road lift up, and at this point the tensions are really high. I love the atmosphere of the world, just how bleak, how post-apocalyptic it looks, how dodgy this is, because Fedra not only have recently beefed up their security because of the Firefly trouble that they've been getting, but they're also looking for any signs of movement, because again, they'll hang you if you get caught. And it was in this moment that they get spotted by the Fedra guard, of whom Joel was dealing pills to earlier. This was interesting. Again, I like how they linked it to somebody Joel already has some rapport with, like a Fedra guard who literally would be done already if they found out that he was dealing with a smuggler like Joel. But this is where, just like the video game, very, very similar from here on out, Ellie stabs the guard and Joel kind of has a little bit of a traumatic moment, a flashback to him with his daughter Sarah, and he is completely taken over, and bashes the guard's face in relentlessly. And I like how in the behind the scenes of this episode, after the episode played, they got into how when Sarah saw Joel kill Granny Adler, she got upset, she cried, she was like, you killed her. But with Ellie, she activated. But just going back to that traumatic flashback moment, the last time he was in a similar situation like this was when he was face to face with a military person like this Fedra guard holding a gun. And he wasn't going to let this happen again. And I have to say, Pedro Pascal just absolutely nailed this scene, quite literally. But the thing is, we can't forget that the Fedra guard that Joel had been dealing with previously started scanning them. And this is when Tess finds out that the scan for Ellie shows that she is infected. But the thing is, even though the test result pops up with that, she is immune. So this freaks Tess out initially, but she's like, I've had this for weeks. This bite is basically a scar now. I'm clearly fine. It's not taking longer to infect me, even though arguably she could in their minds, which is why they're so apprehensive, get infected and is just taking an unprecedented amount of time to get infected. It's still looking like, hey, but normally people get infected in one day. It's been 3 weeks for you. So they need to get out of there, and we see them go out into the world, and it just looks incredible. And I'm so excited for the next episode because we got a little bit of a trailer, and we know from the trailers beforehand, we see them carefully navigate certain buildings, and there's a clicker in there. Don't worry, this isn't spoilery stuff. It's just more detail in how the cordyceps infection does make you infected, but as we know, it's fungal. So the longer you're infected, the different kind of, I suppose, fungal mutations it can give you. And there's these very, very formidable infected known as clickers. And as what you've seen in other trailers, there's even bigger infected people who've turned into freaking beasts. But the clickers is going to provide for a very tense atmospheric episode as we see Tess, Joel, and Ellie navigate their way around a clicker. That's going to be absolutely insane. Now with this trailer at the end, it also seems to showcase some stuff from future episodes, such as maybe Riley and Ellie. I don't know if we're going to get that in the next episode or if it's going to be sometime further down the line. But there was a certain scene. Now don't worry, this isn't spoilers for anyone who has absolutely no context. All I'm going to say is I can't believe that they teased us with this. What you're seeing on screen right now. Now, if you've played the game, you should know what this kind of hospital-looking location is. And wow, I remember there was a theory for a long time that maybe they wouldn't get to the end of the game and maybe season 1 would cut off around a certain mark in the winter mode. And those of you who have played the game know exactly what I mean by the winter storyline. But no, it seems they're going the whole distance. And I was just surprised. I was like, damn, they teased fans who have played the game with this particular clip right here. And that has got me super, super hyped to reach this moment where we see Joel with his gun here entering a certain location, and this is indeed towards the back end of the story for the first game. So overall, guys, I know this has been like a long rambly review of this first episode, but I thoroughly enjoyed it. I think it is up there, and I'm trying to think of what other video game adaptations there's been. Obviously Halo has been very questionable with adapting actual Halo lore, but this is up there with that's arguably some of the best, if not the best, within episode 1 already. If you just isolate episode 1 from that very beginning portion of the Last of Us game, insanely accurate, doing all the right things that you need to like check the boxes with when you adapt a story, whether that's from a graphic novel or an existing thing like a video game. They did everything and more. People might disagree with the casting, some people might disagree with, I don't know, the fungal changes like spores, no gas masks and stuff, but for the things that like really matter, they nailed it. They nailed it. Now, this is obviously very early days, so they could do very controversial things, you know, 4 episodes in, I don't know. But again, isolating it off of this first episode of HBO Max's The Last of Us, they did an impeccable job. They really did. And I hope it continues. So let me know what you guys thought of The Last of Us episode 1. I read every single comment, so I can't wait to see what you guys have got to say. If you made it this far in a video, would really appreciate you liking it. It helps support the content. I don't have an existing video game-esque audience, but who knows how many people are going to tune into this, so help me boost it out there a little bit more. If you're brand new as well, do consider subscribing because I'm trying to reach a higher number. It'd be fantastic if you're a brand new viewer and you want to stick around for the breakdowns of future episodes, which will be a bit more in the breakdown format. This was more of like a big overall blabber review at the same time. So hopefully you enjoy the future episode breakdowns and hopefully you subscribe for them. But until next time, guys, thank you so much for watching. I hope you all have a lovely rest of your day, and I'll see you guys in the next video. Goodbye.